number of you have let me know that there is a hot new book coming out soon all about the war on science. And it's not out yet, so obviously I haven't read it, but I'm pretty pumped because I enjoyed the first one, The Republican War on Science, which was published 20 years ago. So obviously it is due for an update. It's weird, though, that this one has dropped the Republican part because it seems like the attacks on science are still coming almost exclusively from Republicans, as I detailed in my previous video about how the Trump administration is disappearing published research that conflicts with their worldview and bullying editors of scientific journals to present both sides of pulmonary embolisms or whatever, and defunding important scientific institutions. So yeah, it's really weird that Chris Mooney would drop the word Republican from the title for this updated version of his book, because this makes me think that maybe he now thinks the war on science is not solely or even primarily Republican. It suggests a bipartisan war at best and a democratic war on science at worst. Hold on, let me just zoom in on the author. Oh, hold on. It's not from Chris Mooney. This is a collection of essays edited by Lawrence Krauss. Well, that's weird. Let's have a look at the publisher's description. From assaults on merit-based hiring to the policing of language and replacing well-established disciplinary scholarship by ideological mantras, current science and scholarship is under threat throughout Western institutions. As this group of prominent scholars, ranging across many different disciplines and political leanings, detail, the very future of free inquiry and scientific progress is at risk. Many who have spoken up against this threat have lost their positions, and a climate of fear has arisen that strikes at the heart of modern education and research. Banding together to finally speak out, this brave and unprecedented group of scholars issues a clarion call for change. Topics include free speech, victimhood, ideology, corruption of academic disciplines, cancel culture, DEI, gender and race, and what we can do. Higher education isn't what it used to be. Cancel culture and DEI have caused many to keep their mouths shut. Not so the authors of this book. This collection of essays tells of threats to open inquiry, free speech, and the scientific process itself. A much-needed book, says Sabina Hassenfelder, physicist and author of Existential Physics, A Scientist's Guide to Life's Biggest Questions. Okay, there it is. If you missed my previous videos about Sabina Hassenfelder, she's the disgraced former physicist turned YouTuber who thinks that the researchers who have found that science-based trans healthcare saves lives are crazy. And so the choice to have her blurb in this summary caused me to notice a few names in the list of contributors to the war on science who seem to share a similar anti-science, anti-trans worldview, particularly Steven Pinker, Richard Dawkins, and Jerry Coyne. I mean, I'm sure many of the names on this list share that view, but these three in particular jumped out at me because of an event that occurred recently in the atheist community, if that still exists. All three of these men were honorary board members of the Freedom from Religion Foundation, a nonprofit founded in 1978 by the feminist freethinker Annie Nicole Gaylor to fight for the continued separation of church and state in the United States. But a few months ago, Pinker, Dawkins, and Coyne all resigned from the board because FFRF decided to remove a post Coyne made about transgender people. Why did they decide to remove it? Well, just to pick one sentence, Coyne claimed transgender then appear to be twice as likely as natal males and at least 14 times as likely as natal females to be sex offenders, which he bases on one transphobic group's claim that 60 trans people in England and Wales prisons are sex offenders, which is a slightly higher percentage than the number of cis men in those prisons who are sex offenders. That's right, 60 people in prison used to justify the claim that trans people are twice as likely as cis men to commit sex crimes. Here's a related statistic. Black people make up 40% of the population of U.S. prisons, despite only being about 14% of the general population. Does Jerry Coyne think that that means that Black people are more likely to commit crimes? You know what? Actually, that's a bad example because honestly, I think he probably does believe that. So how about this instead? The number of U.S. federal prisoners who are Protestant is only about 29%, despite the fact that they represent 44% of the U.S. population. Does that mean that Protestants are less likely than, say, Jews to commit crimes? Or Buddhists? No, you fucking drooling halfwit. It does not mean that. Just like a handful of shitty trans people in prison doesn't tell us anything about the total population of trans people. Despite this complete lack of evidence, Coyne uses it to insist that trans women should be prohibited from certain jobs, like serving as rape counselors and workers in battered women's shelters. And also, if convicted of a crime, they should not be placed in a women's prison, because he thinks trans women are more predatory than cis women or cis men. When FFRF deleted Coyne's post, he resigned in protest. Richard Dawkins and Steven Pinker agreed with him so wholeheartedly that, yes, trans women are more predatory and cannot be trusted in certain jobs that they resigned as well. And now all three are contributors to Lawrence Krauss's new collection of essays about the threat of gender and cancel culture. It's fascinating to me that they decided to contribute to this anthology in particular in the wake of their very brave resignations, because now I'd like to tell you a little bit about the editor, Lawrence Krauss. If you know anything about Lawrence Krauss, you might know that he's a theoretical physicist who's written more than a dozen well-received popular science books. And if you know anything else about Lawrence Krauss, you know that he's a sniveling, unctuous sex pest who's been credibly accused many, many times of sexual harassment and assault by various women, and that he vociferously has defended his very good friend, Jeffrey Epstein. The Epstein connection was the first time I started to realize something wasn't quite right with Lawrence Krauss. Back in 2011, a reader of my blog, Skepchick, emailed me with a concerning quote. The Daily Beast had reported that Krauss was asked about his relationship with convicted pedophile Jeffrey Epstein, and he was quoted as saying, "If anything, the unfortunate period he suffered has caused him to really think about what he wants to do with his money and his time and support knowledge," says Krauss. Jeffrey has surrounded himself with beautiful women and young women, but they're not as young as the ones that were claimed. As a scientist, I always judge things on empirical evidence, and he always has women ages 19 to 23 around him, but I've never seen anything else. So as a scientist, my presumption is that whatever the problems were, I would believe him over other people. Though colleagues have criticized him over his relationship with Epstein, Krauss insists, "I don't feel tarnished in any way by my relationship with Jeffrey. I feel raised by it." And again, that was after Epstein had already been convicted of, child sex crimes. So I had met Krauss before very briefly, and I'd read some of his writings, and I couldn't imagine that he would say something so bonkers to a journalist. So I reached out via email to get the full context that the reporter had clearly omitted. And what I got back stunned me, not just because Krauss doubled down on his support for his sex offender friend, but because the emails I received looked and sounded as if they were written by a semi-literate 10-year-old boy. In a typo-written screed, Krauss accused the underage girls of targeting Jeffrey Epstein and victimizing him. When I asked if I could post his reply in full, he said yes, and he wanted this part added in which he brought up rumors I had never even heard of, that Krauss himself had engaged in orgies on Epstein's island, and he insisted those rumors were not true, which, yeah, that's a wild thing to introduce to the conversation, but okay. Krauss then continued battling for Epstein in the comments. It was really surreal at the time, but in the years since then, things became clearer as I heard from more and more women that Krauss was, in fact, a sex pest. I even heard accounts from employees of Center for Inquiry who said that a woman reported Krauss for sexually harassing her and making her deeply uncomfortable when he was the featured speaker on one of their cruises, and he suggested that she join him and his wife in a threesome. Several employees who heard about this incident tried to get CFI director Ron Lindsay to stop inviting Krauss on the annual cruises, but he refused because Krauss sells tickets. Eventually, a team of reporters at BuzzFeed decided to collect all the credible accounts about Krauss that they could confirm. In addition to that cruise ship story, they also found that Krauss had pushed a woman down onto the bed of his hotel room and grabbed her crotch, which she told friends at the time was completely non-consensual, invited to dinner an undergraduate student at the university where he was a full professor. The student wrote about it in the school paper without naming Krauss, but his reputation for sexually harassing undergrads was so well known that the dean figured out it was him immediately and asked the student to make a formal complaint. The number of complaints resulted in Case Western banning him from stepping foot on campus without prior approval. Krauss got banned from ever returning to lecture at the Perimeter Institute due to an incident that they wouldn't detail due to privacy concerns of the victim, groped the legs of another undergrad at an atheist conference against her will, grabbed the breast of a woman who attended one of his lectures after she asked for a selfie, sexually harassed his employees and undergrads at Arizona State so often that they started keeping lists of the incidents and freely announced that he was a sexist and a womanizer. One example was that he admitted he didn't hire women of childbearing age to avoid paying for maternity leave, and asked one employee if she was on birth control so that she wouldn't inconvenience him. 8 months after that article went up, BuzzFeed followed it up with a treasure trove of documents on Krauss's predatory behavior just coming from Arizona State. He propositioned a prospective employee, suggesting a threesome. He told one employee that she should take one for the team and date a donor who was attracted to her. He discussed strip clubs with his staff, and when challenged on his actions, he tried to pass it all off as a joke. They found that he also groped the thigh of another atheist activist, Christina Rad, and he encouraged staff to view fan mail, including nude photos, and showed them a cartoon of a person bent over with their pants down, revealing their bare buttocks. The report also described how Krauss and an employee whose name is redacted engaged in conduct towards one another, hugging, touching, kissing in the presence of staff, giving the perception to current and former staff members that they were involved in an intimate relationship. Krauss and the employee denied there was an intimate relationship and stated that the interactions were a form of greeting. Finally, to add to all of those reports, there is a record of 3 additional cases in which Krauss allegedly sexually harassed people, as documented by one of his colleagues who wrote this blog post on March 10th of 2018. After that BuzzFeed article appeared, I did some digging on my own and came up with 3 cases that have convinced me that Krauss engaged in sexual predation of both a physical nature, groping, and of a verbal nature, offensive and harassing comments. The allegations that convince me are not public, but the accusers are sufficiently credible that I believe their claims to be true. Further, these claims buttress the general allegation of sexual misbehavior made in BuzzFeed. In my view, then, Krauss had a propensity to engage in sexual misconduct. I therefore disassociate myself from the man. All I can do, and which I do here, is publicly disassociate myself from Krauss, declare that the behaviors I know of are reprehensible, and hope that he owns up to his behavior. The name of the colleague who wrote these strong words? Jerry Coyne. Yep, that's right, the man who alleges that trans women are predators who can't be trusted around vulnerable women, the man who has contributed an essay to Lawrence Krauss's new book, and who at some point in the past few years deleted this post rebuking Krauss as a sexual predator and claiming that he would disassociate from him. So, yeah, you might be able to see where I'm going with this. Simon & Schuster has decided to allow a man with a rich and detailed history of sexually harassing his young students, colleagues, and fans, and who spent years defending Jeffrey Epstein, the most famous child sex predator on the planet, to publish a collection of essays that include contributions from men who fervently believe that trans women are predators who shouldn't be allowed to work with vulnerable women. Wow, they must be right. Cancel culture is real. I can't wait to read all about it in their big book. Hey everybody, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. If you loved the video, please subscribe. And if you think the world could use more videos like this and you happen to have a few bucks laying around, head to patreon.com/Rebecca and join an awesome community of nerds like the people whose names you see on the screen right now. Thanks.